Now, with the introduction of the Alexa 35 Xtreme, ARRI introduces the new ARRI Core Codec. And it's important to note that it is not a RAW codec like ARRI RAW, but it retains all the capabilities of it. So you can change exposure, white balance, and even the color tint in post like you do with ARRI RAW.
What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD Newsroom with Mino Leitner and Johnny Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly CineTech podcast.
Welcome to Focus Check, the weekly CineTech podcast from CineD, brought to you usually by Johnny and me. This week, it's me alone. He has a week off, a very well-deserved week off. But we're going to dive into a lot of exciting news. First and foremost, the ARRI Alexa 35 Xtreme. Now, the ARRI Alexa 35 Xtreme was announced last week on the day we launched our last week's podcast. So unfortunately, we didn't have the news much earlier. But I had a call with a product manager and he ran me through all the specs and ran me through all the features of it. And it's time to dive in now to really dissect what the Alexa 35 Xtreme is and why this move makes sense for ARRI and I guess also their customers. So at its base, the Alexa 35 Xtreme is basically a enhanced, I would say severely enhanced version of the Alexa 35, which has been their most popular camera ever, especially also most popular digital camera. Now, to remind you, the original Alexa 35 is the most popular, not only the most popular, but also the best performing camera when it comes to dynamic range. And that's not only from what the manufacturer says, but also what we verified through our lab tests. Now, that is the renowned lab test that we perform with every camera that we get our hands on, which is production ready. Like, we don't do this on pre-production models. We wait until it's the actual camera that the manufacturer says is the one that's going to be sold. And then we run the same dynamic range test, the same rolling shutter test, and the same exposure latitude test. And this camera really comes out on top, the Alexa 35. It's the benchmark. Now, the Alexa 35 Xtreme does not have a new sensor. So while we didn't have our hands on this camera yet, we don't expect the dynamic range to get even better with this. However, it gets a number of key new things that are also in the hardware that should make it a more versatile camera. Let me explain. So basically, Xtreme comes from the fact that you can now record up to 660 frames per second. So it really becomes a high-speed camera. And it has a new codec that is called the ARRI Core Codec. The original Alexa 35, could do, a reasonable amount of high frame rates. If we look at this here, we saw that in 4.6K open gate, it could do up to 75 frames per second. Not bad. The Xtreme can do up to 120 frames per second in 4.6K open gate in the normal mode. Now, there is a new so-called sensor overdrive mode in the Xtreme. What is that? Basically, it's a separate way of reading out the sensor. Because the Alexa 35 Xtreme has a much, much faster processor, they're able to get higher frame rates processed and also saved in the new ARRI Core Codec, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But basically, this new processor allows a faster sensor readout for those higher speeds. But it comes at a downside. Well, not always, because, like if in normal mode, you also see a significant difference, a significant increase. So instead of 75 with the 4.6K open gate, so basically the full sensor, it's now 120 frames per second in full quality. Like there is no, you don't have to sacrifice quality here. But if you want even more in that same 4.6K open gate, you have to enable the sensor overdrive mode, and then you get up to 165 frames per second. Now, sensor overdrive mode reduces the dynamic range. ARRI says that the camera, the Alexa 35, has up to 17 stops of dynamic range, and that is what we kind of verified in our dynamic range test. We measured 16.3 stops at SNR 1, I think. So it's very close to the manufacturer's claims, which is usually not the case. And that is the best result we've ever seen. Now with the sensor overdrive mode, from their claimed 17 stops, it drops down to 11 stops. So that's significantly less, of course. So you will have to expose a lot more carefully. You will not have as much detail retained, especially in the highlights. Because if we look at this, and this is a chart that I was shown in the presentation by the product manager, which I'm allowed to share here and also on our website. Of course, as always, link in the show notes to the detailed article about this camera, which includes all this information in written form. But you can see here side by side what's the, where 18% gray is in different exposure latitudes, in different ISOs, with the exposure index, with the Alexa 35 Xtreme, which is, kind of the same as it was before with a normal Alexa 35. And now when you switch on the sensor overdrive, how that changes, because you lose those 6 stops essentially. And basically it cuts off most of that in the highlights. So you have to really protect your highlights because they're gone, As we know from many other cameras that have a lower dynamic range, it's usually the highlights that suffer if you overexpose them. The shadows are very often much easier to recover because you have noise there, but noise can be, in many cameras, depending on what the actual latitude result is. But noise, if it's fine noise, it can be processed in post-production and reduced, and not so much with highlights, because if they're gone, basically. And in this case, we see that it changes also the base ISO. So if you shoot in sensor overdrive mode at exposure index 800, you will not have you will only have 3.2 stops above medium gray, which is nothing. I mean, it's very little. And then you really, really, it's very squeezed. Your highlights are really squeezed. So ARRI recommends to use 1600 or 3200 EI in sensor overdrive mode, and it looks like even 3200 is better here in this case, because then you have 5.2 stops above medium gray and 5.7 stops below it. And still, you always just deal with those 11 stops, but you will have something that is more, easier to expose essentially. And but you have to be a lot more careful. I mean, that's always the irony that we keep telling people with any high-end camera. The better the camera is, like the more dynamic range and the more exposure latitude it offers, the less careful you actually have to be with exposing, because it is so flexible to fix that in post with an Alexa 35, for example, which is not the case with a much cheaper camera. Let's say you go, you shoot on a GoPro or whatever, or an iPhone, and then you have essentially something like 8 or 9 stops to deal with. That means you have to be much more careful exposing. Of course, those cameras are a bad example because they're fully automatic. But let's say you use a 5D Mark II or something really old and have very, very low dynamic range. You have to expose very, very carefully in order to not sacrifice your highlights and shadows. And that's not the case with a high-end cinema camera that offers you that crazy dynamic range like the Alexa 35. So as you can see, the sensor overdrive mode, which enables those high frame rates, comes at a price, and that price is 6 stops of dynamic range. However, it gives you a lot more higher speeds than just the 165 frames per second that I mentioned in 4.6K open gate, because of course you can shoot in different aspect ratios and resolutions too. So for example, there's also a 3.8K 16:9 mode, which is very popular and has been very popular with the Alexa 35, and where the original Alexa 35 offered 120 frames per second in that mode. It's in the standard mode now with full quality, 150 frames per second and up to 240 frames per second with sensor overdrive. Now that is a mode that, of course, I can see a lot of people using on a regular basis. Now, when I say popular, I really mean popular, because one cool thing is with ARRI, of course, they have their service centers around the world, and because they're high-end cinema cameras, their cameras get sent in for service regularly, right? They told me that they are keeping all the log files anonymized, because they don't know which log file belongs to which camera essentially after the process, but they will download all the log files from all the cameras that come back for any kind of service, and they analyze them for what aspect ratios and resolutions and formats are being used in the camera and which codecs also. And they basically, based on that, because the Alexa 35 offered so many different modes, they reduced what's available to what people are actually using. And I think that's really, really great. I think I told Mark, the product manager, I was amazed to hear that, because if you think about it, I think a traditional Japanese manufacturer would probably not even talk about that kind of stuff, because we know one of the things that frustrates us with many Sony cameras or Canon or Panasonic very often to different degrees is that their menus are incredibly complicated. I mean, you can dive in and you can change every setting, which is great, but it's also not great because it's very hard to find your way around, especially if you work with different cameras. And it's not that you need 99% of those options on a regular basis. So it makes things overly complicated, and you might have a lot of different shooting modes, resolutions that you never ever need. I mean, that's not only for the Japanese manufacturers, but also for Red. Just dive into, like if you look in our camera databases, you can look at all the media and recording times and formats for each camera, and we list all of them. And it's sometimes hundreds or even thousands of combinations that are possible per camera. Just look at what's possible with a Red camera, for example, the amount of combinations. It's staggering. But it's not needed in many cases, right? You don't need all of that crazy combinations in every case. So ARRI just looked at what people are actually using and just didn't include the ones that they're not using anymore. And that's it, right? I think that's great. I think simplicity goes a long way, especially when you're on a film set and you don't want to be a camera technician if you're a cinematographer. But anyway, so I think great move, and I think every manufacturer should do that and look at the log files in an anonymized way, of course, and just check in general what are people doing in camera menus. Like what are they actually setting regularly? What are they looking for regularly? I wish manufacturers would dive into that and actually design their menus according to that. But back to the formats of the Alexa 35 Xtreme. Now, I was talking about the higher frame rates that are possible in 16:9 3.8K, and the highest frame rate you can get out of this camera is in a Super 13 2K 16:9 crop mode, which Sean from ARRI said is surprisingly popular. And this on the original 35 was 120 frames per second. And that was the highest frame rate that the camera could record. So it was actually the same frame rate you had in the 3.8K 16:9, which is interesting. But now with the Xtreme, it jumps massively, even in standard mode. So it's full quality. And of course, that's a crop. That's a sensor crop, right? It's a Super 16 crop, which means, of course, the noise gets larger. However, we know from the Alexa 35, it's finely dispersed noise, which is very manageable and can also be easily cleaned up in post. So you can get up to 330 frames per second in the standard mode in full quality on this camera. So that's a massive jump. I mean, it's almost 3 times as many frames per second in that mode, and that already makes it a high-speed camera. But you can even double that to 660 frames per second when you enable the sensor overdrive mode, which gives you only the 11 stops of dynamic range. And 660 frames per second is awfully close to Phantom Flex territory, right? I mean, yes, you can shoot 1,000 frames per second in 4K with a Phantom Flex 4K. However, it's an extremely expensive camera as well. It costs, I think, roughly the same as an ARRI Alexa 35, if I'm not mistaken. And it's kind of a single purpose, one-trick pony, because you will only use it for high-speed shoots, which means it's not only usually the cost for the additional rental of that high-speed camera on a set, but it's also the additional cost for a high-speed technician that actually knows how to operate a Phantom Flex 4K. Like every time I've shot with a Phantom Flex 4K, I knew what I wanted, but I wasn't the guy who operated it because, it's better to have an expert do that. And because it works with these sensor bursts and all that, you will need to know how to operate with it in order to not run out of storage within the shortest amount of time. Now, the Alexa 35 Xtreme is not quite there, of course, in terms of the high speeds, but I think it's close enough for probably 90% of the productions that you need a high speed, you need a high speed shot or whatever, or one scene shot in high speed. I mean, usually, even if it's a commercial, you don't shoot the whole thing in high speed. So it's not like you're completely dependent on that for every shot. And of course, the additional advantage is if you can use your A camera for those high-speed shoots, it means that also the look of it will be the same, right? It goes through the same pipeline, the same image pipeline that the main footage goes through. So post-production will be much easier. Nothing will have to be specifically matched to the original footage. So that also saves time and effort, I guess. So if you look at some of the footage that they produced, and as usual, ARRI did a great job at hiring great TPs to, shoot demo stuff for their new camera. It looks amazing. I mean, it simply looks amazing, and you can already tell, of course, this is graded. You can already tell that it has the full dynamic range that you would expect from an ARRI camera, with, of course, the limitation of the 11 stops once you go to the sensor overdrive mode. But it's all manageable. I think it's all manageable. And it's not that a Phantom Flex has that much more. I think a Phantom Flex is rated at around 12 stops. We haven't tested that in our lab yet. It's also very hard to test for us high speed in general. I mean, we will, of course, get our hands on the Alexa 35 Xtreme, and we will do our best to do a proper lab test of that camera. However, the challenge here is that you need to throw so much light at it when you shoot high speed that it's a challenge to get the exposure right without changing the fixtures that we're using. And we'll manage, but I'm just saying that's something that is not so easy, especially for the latitude test, of course. But we'll try our best just to see how close we are to those 11 stops. But talking from history and what we have seen from ARRI so far, it's that their claims are always very, very close to what we measure, and they're really the only manufacturer that are very honest about what their cameras are capable of delivering, essentially. So yeah, footage looks amazing, and I think it's great. Anyway, so what else is new with this camera? The other new big thing is the ARRI Core Codec, which is, there's two reasons why there's a new codec, I guess. It's better processor. So this much faster processor that the Xtreme has means that you can more effectively compress footage. And yes, it is a compressed format. However, it retains most of the advantages, if not all of the advantages, of ARRI RAW, which is very, very interesting. So basically, it gives you the ARRI Core Codec is required to shoot those high frame rates because, of course, we're talking about also card speeds, and also it's able to compress fast enough to record up to those 660 frames per second onto the codecs drives. Now, people were actually in our comments, they were talking about what ARRICORE is and how they achieve these high frame rates, and how this is also getting around the the RED patent, right? We know that RED has a patent for compressed RAW, and that is something that has caused a lot of lawsuits in the past. If you remember, RED famously, of course, sued Nikon, and then Nikon sued back, and then Nikon acquired RED, and then also we had the same thing that I think Apple actually tried to get rid of that patent and was not successful with that. So it's still there, and that kind of is a lot of the reason why there's a limitation around RAW recording in cameras still. Now, there is a couple of exceptions, of course, one of them being Blackmagic RAW. And Blackmagic RAW seems to be able to be available in the market because some of the debayering already happens in camera. And that is something that the RED codec patent is not basically, or the RED patent is not covering. So they seem to have a way. I'm not a lawyer or anything, but that, to the best of our information, that's how they get around this patent. And the kind of debayering, partly debayering in camera, seems to be one of the things that ARRI is doing. Now let's quickly look at a white paper that they released actually just after they released the camera about the new ARRI Core RGB codec. And it's worth looking at this because it explains why they did it and why it's necessary. So basically, it says that ARRI Core is a proprietary codec that combines all the advantages of ARRI RAW with maximum flexibility and a reduced data rate. Interesting. And they also say that it's a next generation RGB codec developed with high dynamic range encoding in mind, of course, and still have the flexibility that you would expect in post-production, but at a lower data rate. And what's important for them is, of course, that it doesn't change the workflow, and said that it remains compatible with existing workflows. And also it records like ARRI RAW, includes the same ARRI look file, the ALF4 files, ARRI textures, MXF wrapper, metadata, and audio handling. It's now still in beta. Now that is important to mention. So if you use it with the Xtreme, just keep in mind that it's in beta, and also that the Alexa 35 Xtreme is the only camera that supports it, because it's the only one that has a processor fast enough to encode it. So if you use multiple Alexa cameras on a set, just keep in mind that this will be the only one capable of actually recording in that codec. So unfortunately. Now, basically what the Alexa 35 does internally, it has an 18-bit linear image data that comes from the new ALF4 processor, as we know, and it's stored in RGB file in a logarithmic encoding, and they call this sensor log, of course. And the ARRICORE enables faster proxy modes for speedy preview processing, and of course, the main reason why they, I think, developed this codec is just to be able to compress those high frame rates with up to 330 frames per second in regular mode, or 660 frames per second in the overdrive mode. Now, what's interesting is that they are putting all the technology, the software technology that it requires to actually read that codec in third-party applications that are already capable of dealing with ARRI RAW. They're putting everything into the ARRI Image SDK. That's the software development kit that ARRI gives to developers in order to be able to implement the processing capabilities for their codecs into their third-party softwares. They are putting it into the existing SDK, which means when the SDK is updated, all the third-party applications should already be able to process ARRICORE without an update to, significant updates to the editing platform itself, which is, of course, a very smart move. So basically, they supply the software developers with everything they need. Once they just update the SDK in the applications, it will automatically work. There will be nothing that they need to do. That's as far as I understand that, and that's really smart, of course, because you basically ARRI does the legwork here for the software developers of other NLEs, and then it's already capable of doing processing it. Now let's look at the data rates here. As you can see, it's around half of the data rate of ARRI RAW, and that means I think a typical 2 terabyte codecs drive gives you around an hour of recording time in 4K OpenGate, I think, in 24 frames per second, like 4.6K 3x2 OpenGate. And now this will double. So we will have 2 hours of recording time on a 2 terabyte drive. And that's, of course, significant. So it's around 50% reduced in terms of data. Now, the core thing to highlight in this white paper is that ARRI clearly states that ARRICORE is not a RAW format, but it retains the essential post-production flexibility of ARRI RAW, which means that the image SDK decodes the RGB sensor log image for a reveal color science workflow to enable changes in exposure, white balance, and color tint non-destructively after capture. And there we also have it, that they actually say in the document that leveraging the 18-bit image processing pipeline inside the camera, the image from the sensor is debayered into an RGB image and then encoded by a proprietary process to an MXF wrapped file. So there you have it. The debayering is happening in camera, which is why they are allowed and capable of doing that. And that is down to fast processors. So I think, we know that this red patent I think it runs out 2030 or even beyond that, and there's a possibility for them to extend it and whatnot. I mean, we don't know how Nikon is handling that in general, if they will be as strict with that as Red has been, but I'm guessing they will also protect their intellectual property in that regard and their patent. But it looks like it won't matter very soon because processors are now fast enough to do debayering in camera, so we'll see more and more cameras doing the same thing. And then, there's really no reason to use the red or kind of, be in confrontation with that red patent because you will be able to do this in camera. So very interesting. This is how ARRICORE works. Now let's go back to the Alexa 35 news here. And so basically those are the two major things that are new with this camera. Now, with ARRI, you would expect that this is an expensive camera, right? I mean, usually when ARRI comes out with a new camera, they're known not to drop prices of existing products. They just at some point will kind of have them phase out and be end of lifed, which of course makes them a very, very valuable investment as long as they can maintain that status of being the most, best performing camera in the market. That is something that is really great for cinematographers and rental houses because it just keeps the value up of something you invest in. Even though it's one of the most expensive cameras in the world, it's also something that doesn't devalue as quickly as a Red camera, for example, when Red has dropped prices many, many times, even for the top models, which means you invest in one day and then 2 weeks later it becomes cheaper and you immediately have something that's not in the resale market worth as much as it used to be, and you also are not able to charge as much per day for it as a shooter. And now this has never been the case with ARRI, and that's what a lot of operators and owner operators, of course, value about ARRI. And in this case, they do a smart move. Now we know that the cinema market is really under pressure right now. Especially high-end cinema is really suffering. Production is down. I mean, we've reported about it many, many times. There's a lot of challenges from different sides. I mean, the streaming wars are over. There's a lot more reason gone into production again, which means that we have these overcapacities now of production that was built up over the COVID years. And now after the streaming wars kind of, there's less production happening. It's also down to the fact of the aftermath of the strikes, but also the looming challenges with AI and what's around the corner. So, we all know, you might know if you're an imaging professional, that the market is under pressure. Now, it's particularly under pressure in the high end, and the high end is exactly where ARRI lives, and which makes it a tough sale to, introduce a new camera. Now, I would say if this camera had been introduced 3-4 years ago, or even 2-3 years ago, they probably would have charged, I don't know, something like 10, 20, 30,000 extra on top of the normal Alexa 35 and introduced this as a separate model. Now they're doing a different thing this time. So basically they're discontinuing the existing Alexa 35 and are replacing it with the Alexa 35 Xtreme, and they're charging the same price, which is great, of course. So, from one day to the other, you suddenly get, for the same amount of money, a much more capable camera in terms of high frame rates, with a new codec and all the bells and whistles. Like there's a couple other things that are new, of course, better Wi-Fi connectivity with more standards and so on. So a lot of other stuff, you can dive into that in our article. But those are the main things. And you will not pay more for that. And that's also great, of course, for rental houses. And they're giving a quite attractive option to upgrade your existing Alexa 35. So for 15,900 euros, you're able to send in your camera, and they will basically change the whole motherboard, change the processor, change some extra high-end processing unit that's separate from the main processor that will also be added, that I was told will add additional capabilities to the cameras in the near future, which they haven't said yet what, but they are planning to announce more new features in the next couple of months. So yeah, it's still a lot of money, 16,000 to upgrade the camera, but it means a lot of physical labor on ARRI's part and also new components. So I understand why they charge that, of course, and it will have to go back to one of their 5, I think right now it's 5 service centers around the world, and one in Australia, 1 or 2 in Asia, 1 in the US, and I think 2 in Europe. And basically you can send it there and they will do the hardware change, and with between 3 and 7 days you should get your camera back, and it's upgraded to an Xtreme then with all the capabilities. And again, they will also retain all the packages that they have, so there will still be a base model and a premium model. If you have a premium model, you have all the bells and whistles out of the box. If you have the base model, you can upgrade different things separately. And if you're an existing premium model, they will upgrade it to the Xtreme premium model and so on. So it's kind of simple the way they've organized this. So very smart move. And I think if you look at especially commercial production where a lot of high speed is needed frequently, if you can save on that extra high-speed camera rental, this upgrade definitely makes sense. And of course, for new purchases, it's a no-brainer, and it might actually help their sales, which I'm sure have been lagging after, there's been a very big boom on the Alexa 35 purchases when it came out a couple years ago, and then the market crashed. So I think it might help them for sure. So yeah, that's the Alexa 35 Xtreme. They already are shipping it. Oh, that's, by the way, the processor, what it looks like, with also a lot more memory. I'm told there's a lot more onboard memory, which also, is capable of delivering those high frame rates and the processing. It's in stock already. They said that if you're fast as a individual to order it, you should get one, and they will, of course, ship to their subsidiaries and big rental customers first. Yeah, so very, very interesting move. Let us know what you think about the Alexa 35 Xtreme, and if there is, a need for that in the market. I think so. I think it's a good move, and it just proves that ARRI is really listening, and that they're not only doing, like a basic software update, because when they introduced the base model, of course, this is purely software, and it looked like artificially kind of limiting the camera so they can sell existing stock at a lower price, which makes sense from a financial perspective, of course. But this is really a hardware upgrade. So it's great to see that they are, really enhancing the camera in that way. So even though the Alexa 35, I think, is only 2 years old, so it's a fairly recent camera. For a camera, those high-end models usually have at least 5-year lifetime. It's already being replaced with a new one. So that's really, really cool. Good. Let's move on to something else. We asked you in a poll this week, or last week actually, what is your favorite camera accessories brand? Now that's a bit of a tough one because of course there's so many brands out there when it comes to camera accessories. We tried to list them all, and of course we forgot some of them. We forgot ARRI because we didn't think of ARRI in that moment as an accessory maker, of course, because they also make accessories under their ARRI PCA brand for other camera manufacturers, for example, Sony, Canon, Panasonic, and so on, and Red, I think. So unfortunately, I only added it recently, so don't take that amount of votes, seriously. And also Peak Design. Somebody commented Peak Design was missing. I don't really see them as an accessory maker per se. Of course, they have some camera accessories, but it's more like bags and kind of like straps and stuff like that. But in any case, I think we covered most of the other ones. And the top ones that came out, who your favorite camera accessory maker is SmallRig by almost 32%, which is massive. And right after that, just below 20%, Tilta. Then Bright Tangerine, which is interesting, at 8.4%. That's interesting because Bright Tangerine, unlike SmallRig and Tilta, is, I would say, a more of a high-end, high-priced kind of accessories. So that kind of speaks for that quality if they show up in the top 3 here, because you will have to shell out a lot more money for a Bright Tangerine accessory than you do for a SmallRig or Tilta one. And same goes for Mid 49. That's only 5.6%, but I mean, they haven't been around for very long and they already get 42 votes, which is great. Of course, founded by the Wooden Camera founders, which is right behind it, actually. Wooden Camera, owned by the Videndum Group, close to 5%. Also, very well-respected camera accessory brand for high-quality accessories, also highly priced. And of course, very similar. Same origin, I would say. So that's no surprise. And then there's Condor Blue, just in between Bright Tangerine and Mid 49. A lot of people love Condor Blue accessories as well. They also haven't been around for that long. So I think that's quite an achievement. And then I would say there's the rest after that. I'm surprised to see brands like Vocus and, Zacuto really far down the list, where they used to be much bigger in this market of accessories, I think. So you can see that SmallRig and Tilta especially have taken over a lot of that market. We know that, I think both SmallRig and Tilta, but SmallRig specifically, when they first appeared on the market, when was it? Probably like 10 years ago, the quality was, not that great, I would say. But they came a long way. And now I think their accessories are also lightweight and they're affordable. So I think a lot of people immediately look at SmallRig and Tilta when they are looking for accessories. Now, Tilta was always, I think, aiming more at the high end a little bit, and always, we're aiming at that cinema market, whereas SmallRig was really kind of getting also the creators, and that's why it's no surprise that a lot of people, of course, with more high volume cameras, I would say, like DSLR cameras and so on, are opting for SmallRig because it's a very accessible brand, and they deliver decent quality for affordable prices now. So that's interesting. And don't forget, last week, the week before, we actually we asked which camera brand you are using mostly, which is also, of course, interesting if you want to go back to that. But now you can see, I think the most popular combination would be a Sony camera with a SmallRig or Tilta accessory when it comes down to the polls. And we had, how many people took part in this? 750 votes, so not bad. So it should be kind of representative, I would say. Good. Let's move on to another piece of news. We had a new iOS app announced this week. We've been in contact with the developers for a while. It's called SwissRig srRAW, and now it's in version 1.2. This is for iOS only, and it's basically an app that enables native internal CinemaDNG recording in an iPhone. So it's a camera app essentially, so just like a Blackmagic camera app. But unlike the Blackmagic camera app, which records, of course, Blackmagic RAW, this app really records CinemaDNG internally. So a sequence of stills DNGs that you can process also in DaVinci. And the USP of this app is that you are getting files out of the camera which are completely devoid of noise reduction or any kind of processing of Apple's image pipelines. So it's completely bypassing Apple's built-in image processing to provide unprocessed capture, basically. So that is something that is impressive. Basically, of course, you will get all the downsides of a small sensor as well, which is a lot more noise that's visible in the image. But you will get also, I think it's a 14-bit image dynamic range that you get out of this. And maybe we should look at this app in the future if we retest iPhones again in our lab to actually acquire the images with this, because it's, that's more native than Apple's built-in processing, which is, of course, highly processing, compressing, doing HDR, whatever, to the image to kind of optimize for what you see on the phone screen. But it's discarding a lot of information. It's discarding 4 bits of data as well. And so this is available now for free, and it works with the iPhone 15 and 16 Pro and Pro Max models. Well, actually, it's not for free. Sorry. It's in the App Store with a one-time lifetime subscription for 40 euros, or you can get a normal annual subscription, I think, for 20 euros per year. Now, somebody noted in the comments that this app had some limitations. So, for example, you can only record to internal memory. It doesn't seem to work with external SSDs or any kind of external memory cards that you can connect, of course, now very easily via USB-C. And you can only move them afterwards to an external SSD, but you cannot natively record to that, which is, of course, a problem if considering the file sizes that it generates. If you don't have a 1 terabyte phone, which is very expensive, you will have very quickly a limit on how much you can record internal. And also because of thermal management, shooting time is limited to 1 minute on 4K and 3 minutes on 3K and 5 minutes on 2.5K, and even shorter times on earlier phones than the 16 Pro, which is the latest one. And this user says that the app uses a heavy crop, only shooting around 65% of the sensor. Now, that is a severe limitation, and it's something that I wish kind of the developers would be more frank about, because when I looked at their website, it's not that I was immediately seeing any of those limitations, to be honest. So that's, of course, a big, big downside. But I guess a lot of it is down to the processing that's capable within the phone. And that's why there's this limitation. The crop is very unfortunate. I wish the crop wasn't there, and I wish it could record externally onto an SSD. We know it's possible, so I hope in the next version of this app, they will enable external recording. I like the design. I have to say it looks very, fluid in a way. It looks very natural, and it demonstrates you well what's possible. So they do a lot of side-by-side shots on what an image looks like if it's recorded with srRAW, and also if it's recorded with a native app. And you can judge it by yourself. I think, of course, there's a lot of downsides to that too, apart from the massive file sizes. And one wonders why you would use your iPhone, to be honest, at some point when you're like that limited in terms of what you can record internally, and why don't you use a proper camera? But I guess it's something you have in your pocket. And if you have that, the best camera is always the one you have in your pocket, and you have your iPhone in your pocket. So if you have something in front of you that is kind of unique, that you think is worth capturing at a higher quality, this is what I probably would use an app like this for. For anything else, I use a proper camera simply because of the severe limitations. Now, it would be different if I had no crop and I had the capability of recording externally, natively. I would just have, the little, actually Condor Blue Angelbird reader with an Angelbird card, just plug it in, have it in my pocket, and then record straight to that, like you can do with Apple's own app and also the Blackmagic camera app. So yeah, but that's just me. But it's nice to have more players in this field. It's nice to give CinemaDNG a bit more love, because of course it's the most flexible RAW format when it comes to what you can do. It's not as limited as Blackmagic RAW, which only works in DaVinci Resolve and so on, and has limitations in other NLEs, as does ProRes RAW, which you can't even record in an iPhone. So nice option to have. Let's see where this goes. All right, let's move on to Strada. Now, we've reported about Strada before. Strada is a startup based in LA, led by Michael Cioni and his brother, who are people who've really come from the cinema world. I mean, Michael has worked at Panavision, he worked at Red, he was, I think, the founder of Light Iron, and all of those, and he was with Frame.io, of course, and then Adobe, and all of those startups that he was part of before kind of became very, very successful, and he's a very interesting person to talk to. We had him in the podcast before, I think as a wrap up for the NAB podcast. And it's always very, very interesting to talk to him because he has a very unique position in between, I would say, the users and the software makers. And he's very, very close to end users through his network also in Hollywood. And he's also very close to the software. So he always seems to find use cases that make a lot of sense for filmmakers. And Strada is doing exactly that. Now, their mission has become to eliminate the cloud from post-production, right? Which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Because essentially what a lot of us are doing now is we're shooting something, we're compressing it to proxies, we're uploading it to the cloud. The cloud, what is the cloud? The cloud is somebody else's computer somewhere. And then somebody else, like an editor, has to download it again from that computer. And then edit it. And that's a cumbersome process because it involves uploading, downloading. A lot of time is lost in between. And what Strada is trying to do now is basically replace the cloud with a peer-to-peer technology. So the whole idea is that basically straight from set, ideally from camera, your editor will be able to access the files and directly edit the proxies. And they've just introduced a new version of their Strada agent, which is doing exactly that. Now, they have a very nice video here, which is demonstrating this process. So essentially, I'm just going through this quickly. They're shooting here on, I think, a Red V-Raptor, and then are ingesting the proxies straight from the camera, do a DIT on set, and the DIT is generating proxies, or actually has already proxies. And no, I think they're generating proxies on the spot. They are in a location with a very low internet connection is around 30 megabits per second upload, I think. And they're compressing it to 4 megabits per second. So you end up with reasonably sized files. And then instead of uploading those proxies, those H.265 proxies to the cloud, the agent actually enables the offsite editor to access the files on the DIT's computer. So they will have access to the full folder structure. They can download and preview what they want and then just download what they need. So you will also save more time and effort there. So essentially, it's almost like, that's why they're saying it's like having a local cloud, because cloud services like Frame.io give you the ability to play back those files and also do decisions on actually what you will actually download and work with in your proxy workflow. But they do the same on your local computer with a relatively low speed internet connection. And that's really cool, right? You can just cut out the middleman here and have people already work much faster without uploading, downloading. So basically you just leave the proxy files on your drive, the DIT leaves them there, and then somebody else from, completely different location can access your computer. You will just tell them which folders they can access. Now, the more fancy workflow here is even enabled by Blackmagic cameras, because Blackmagic cameras support something that is called the SMB protocol. And the SMB protocol is a network protocol that enables those cameras to basically show up on a network as a network drive, just like you would connect to Macs or PCs, whatever, on a local LAN network with each other. You can do the same with, for example, the Ursa Cine 12K LF. And it will just show up as a drive on your computer. And then using the Strada agent, you can just select that drive like any other drive, but it's your camera, it's your internal camera memory, and you can just make it available to your editor remotely, who's also using a Strada agent, and he can just look at the proxies remotely as you are still shooting. So you're still rolling, and every time you finish a file, every time a new proxy is generated in camera, which this camera can do, of course, that proxy will automatically show up in the Strada agent on the person's desktop, basically. So, and then they can just download it, which is amazing. I mean, you literally, like if every camera had the SMB protocol, this would be possible with every camera. And I hope they will introduce it to other manufacturers' cameras as well. Of course, that is down to the manufacturer. There's nothing Strada can do about that. But I hope that this is something that, other camera manufacturers will add to their toolkit, because having this capability is, of course, amazing in these fast turnaround times. Now, we all know, I think more and more content is being produced every day, and it's very often down to how quickly can it be processed. We know the popularity of editing apps on phones simply because we have, this whole ecosystem of creators now that are sometimes just shooting on phones because it's easy, because it's fast. You can edit straight on the phone. You can, whatever. The problem still is, in general, in my opinion, that it's too hard to get footage of a camera edited quickly, right? There's a whole new generation that actually wants to edit on a phone and sometimes wants to edit on a computer, but a lot of them want to edit on the phone. So I want that capability to have everything that I shoot on a camera immediately available on a phone, and do whatever I want with it from there. And the same is true when it comes to higher end workflows like this, where you want it available immediately on a desktop and on a phone, by the way. Why not? Why is there, I hope there will be a Strada agent for your phone as well. Why not? There will be, imagine having your social media person on a shoot. Let's say you shoot a commercial and they want to share behind the scenes, but also some shots as you're shooting the commercial already from the set, without actually having to go through asking for footage from a DIT and so on. They can just everybody can access the files from the camera and can just process it. You have a separate social media team work on that separately from the main edit. That would be amazing. And that's all possible, of course, as soon as you get access to the in-camera files immediately and remotely. And there's a lot of work still to be done. And I think Strada is doing a really great job at pioneering that accessibility of footage and immediate access for whoever needs it, right? So yeah, this is now in beta, this access and share media service in Strada, and you can I think try it with unlimited use for free if you're a Strada user, and the free will always be available with up to 15 gigabytes of transfers per month at no cost. And of course, they have also paid tiers here. And yeah, we look forward to also trying this out for our productions in the near future. Maybe we have a quick, fast turnaround situation where we can use it. Trade shows are always a little bit tough for us because of Wi-Fi congestion and the bad connection in those halls because of all the different things doing different stuff there. But we'll definitely try it out on something where it will work, and look forward to that. All right, let's move on to a little bit of light news from NANLITE. Now, NANLITE introduced, actually recently, they have been introducing a lot of kind of, I would say, creator products, like easy access, inexpensive products that are useful for, lower end production, I would say. Also, which is, I think, a great way to go. This is a market which, of course, the Amaran brand has really focused on. This is the low budget brand of Aperture. Now, NANLITE and NANLUX play a similar game, I would say. And of course, it's a big market to go into that. And the NANLITE wand is exactly what it says. It looks like a wand. It's like a little stick with a lot of LEDs, and it's RGBW, I think. And yeah, it gives you 36,000 color options, and you can operate it with one hand. Now, it's a little bit like a RGB tube, but it's not really a tube in a sense that it's round. It is not round. It's kind of rectangular, but it basically means that all the light comes directed at from one side, which is useful, I think. And but it's really designed to be portable, and you can mount it also somewhere. So you can kind of use it like an RGB tube, but you can also use it as your main light for small shoots, like demonstrated here. Can get a bit of a rim light here and a top light. Yeah, it's available in two different versions, like mint blue or midnight blue, but I think that's just the housing. So that also is another hint at how much this is targeted at, consumers in a way, or prosumers, I would say, because a professional doesn't really care so much, I would say, about what the housing looks like. But it is available basically in a dark color and a bright color. Both of them are shades of blue. And you can, it has a little display, round display, which allows you to kind of, do all the settings there. But it's also compatible with a NanLink app 2.0. So you can manage the light there and wirelessly control it there. And it also allows you to manage multiple lights. So that's easy with that. Good. Yeah. And I think it's powered through an MPF battery. And the CCT range is 2700 Kelvin to 7500 Kelvin with green magenta adjustment, which is great too. So the CCT range on those latest RGB lights is amazing. I think that's really great that you can really adjust for any kind of light temperature. And the price, very attractive. It's $120 US, and it seems to be available already. So that's kind of cool. So nice to have a different shape of an affordable light that is not, just a little box or little round thing. So, but something long that can still easily go with you in a bag. It's nice to have as an extra light. Let's move on to Tilta announcing a full camera cage for the newly announced DJI Osmo 360. Now, we all know, or whoever has ever used a 360-degree camera, there's one big challenge with using them is basically you can't put them down without scratching a lens because you have lenses on both sides. So it becomes actually kind of paramount to protect those lenses. And And of course, in this case, I mean, the cage doesn't really solve that in that sense that you can still put it down on the lenses, but it will give you a lot more mounting options to the cage. Usually, those action cameras and especially 360 cameras get mounted in crazy positions, sometimes quite far away from the subject, because you want to get this immersive view, this fake kind of third-person view or fake drone shot kind of angle that you can only get with a 360-degree camera. And having additional mounting options for that is very, very useful, of course. And we covered it, by the way, in our last podcast, if you are interested in the Osmo 360. By the way, our writer Masha will also do a long-term review of it. She's going to go to Kyrgyzstan later this summer and fall, and she's going to actually shoot a little documentary there. And as part of that, she's going to try out the Osmo 360 and review it and do a long-term review of that, which is going to be interesting, of course. With the main feature being the main, advantage over the Insta360 cameras that DJI claims is that it's more light sensitive because it has a 1-inch sensor, which is the biggest downside of the Insta360 cameras, that they're not that light sensitive. So yeah, basically the cage gives you more mounting options and better protections. And it's also a quick release design, so you can get it out quickly. Consists of multiple metal parts that go around it. And yeah, that's quite interesting. And by the way, let's stick with Tilta for a second. Let me just, at the time of recording, we haven't written about that yet, but when you hear this, we probably already have the article. So that's not an April Fool's joke, I think. But it seems like Tilta just introduced a handheld support system for a drone, for the DJI Mavic 4 Pro. So you can put your Mavic into a kind of two-handle setup and use it like a gimbal. Because, of course, it has a gimbal in front. It's funny, of course, in a way. So that would mean you could use your Mavic 4 Pro as your main camera. And yeah, it's extremely interesting idea, of course. Fully functional handheld camera rig for a drone. Now, I have to scratch my head because I'm not sure who would use that or what to use it for. Because I think if you have a Mavic 4 Pro on set, you will also have a professional on set as well. And but still, if that's what you need, it's a very good gimbal. It has very good stabilization. It's very good cameras with 3 focal lengths, starting I think with 28 millimeters, which is fairly wide, and you can definitely do gimbal shots with that, walking gimbal shots. That is. You cannot launch the drone from that position, I can tell you that, not in a safe way. So it seems to be locked in here. But yeah, interesting thing. I'm looking forward to the comments to reading the comments on this one. But yeah, that's also a fun idea, of course, from Tilta. Yeah, let's see. Let's see if people are actually going to buy this. Good. Let's move on to a little article we had about an opinion article by our writer Omri Lapitote on Sony RX1R3 versus the world. How does it stack up? So basically, Omri compared the latest compact camera that Sony introduced with what's already in the market. And now, of course, what's interesting about we've talked about it before on the podcast, what's interesting about the RX1R3 is that it's basically an update to a 10-year-old camera, but it still retains the same sensor. And actually, I think it's also the same 35 millimeter lens. It's a full frame fixed camera with a fixed 35 millimeter lens. And it's kind of the new generation 10 years later with mostly software upgrades, but also you're losing the tiltable LCD screen at the back, and you're getting a kind of fixed OLED viewfinder there. he's comparing it to the popular models in this category, which is why we guess that Sony actually updated it. Of course, comparing it to the X100 6 from Fujifilm, which is extremely popular, and also some other cameras like the GFX 100 RF from Fujifilm. It seems to be these niche cameras, large sensor, fixed lens, or at least compact full frame cameras, many of which have fixed lenses, seems to be really gaining in popularity. And we think that this is what Sony keeps kind of capitalizing on. And he's listing he says 3.5 main competitors in the market to that, which is the ones that I mentioned, and also the Leica Q3. And where does that leave the Sony camera? Does it make sense? So there's quite some interesting comments there, and it's a fine line of a category that seems to be exploding in a way. Sometimes suddenly compact cameras are all the rage again for a lot of people. However, there's also, not to be forgotten, there's quite a few cameras in this space that flopped enormously. For example, the Zeiss ZX1 camera. If you remember, that was an Android-based camera, which looked beautiful, actually, also with a fixed lens, and it kind of disappeared. I mean, this was announced at a Photokina, I don't know, maybe also like almost 8-9 years ago, and it went nowhere, basically. And then we also had something from Samsung, which was also discontinued. And yeah, it's not that a new compact camera will be immediately successful just because they're kind of like popular again now. It needs to kind of nail what creators are looking for, and Fujifilm seems to be doing a great job in that regard with their vintage looking, X106, but also other cameras in this regard. And let's see how the Sony will do. Omri is a bit skeptical if this will work, because of course high end is more than specs. And yeah, I recommend you check out that article, link in the show notes, and also read the comments, because there's some very interesting insights for a lot of people who have been waiting for this camera but then decided not to buy it because of what it offers and what it doesn't offer. So let's see. Good. Last but not least, let's move on to our educational article of the week. Masha wrote a very nice article on quick and useful tips on working with a green screen. And this is based on the VFX Basics course, the After Effects Beginners course on MZ by Digby Hogan, which we launched recently. So if you're a shooter who's not doing a lot of VFX, but sometimes you need that VFX shot, I really recommend this very short course, 1.5 hours, diving into the basics of After Effects and how you can achieve immediate results using a green screen and good results. And she's in this article, she's diving into this by demonstrating a very, very badly recorded green screen shot and how to kind of salvage it and do a proper chroma key there with After Effects. And, talking about lighting green screens and stuff like that and what's important. And if you want to dive into that, but you're not a VFX artist, but you just need your odd, VFX shot, I really recommend you checking out this article and the course. And that's available now on CineD, and the course is available on MZ. All right, let's wrap it up there. Thanks for listening. My solo rambling this week on this episode of CineD Focus Check, our cinema tech podcast that comes out every Thursday. And next week, I'll be joined by Johnny again, hopefully. Yeah, I think so. And don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And hit like and subscribe on YouTube as well. Leave a comment and email us at podcast@cined.com if you have any suggestions or comments that you want us to talk about on the podcast. Thanks.